Sunrise. That's the one I saw.
And that's the only one that I saw too.
God, I might have even missed that. I've had so many emails. This is like our busy season at work. I have my personal emails, which I usually try to keep like at 0 point, are at like 300 right now.
Oh man,
It's like driving me nuts.
that's such a and it's such a well. Once you get behind, it's like you're never gonna catch up.
Yeah.
It takes hours, and
Yep.
you know you get into a certain mood, and you're finding just like, you know, you probably delete 1 or 2 too many, but then you get rid of 300, and you're like, that was so worth it.
Oh yeah. Hey, how's it going?
Hey guys.
Good, how you doing?
Good. Howdy, howdy. Tracy would come.
She said see you Wednesday night, so I assume
Yeah.
she's coming. Or-
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that
We'll give
An extra pen.
her another minute
What's
or
that?
two to see.
Oh,
Not supposed to
let me see what I have.
I feel like I always
Certainly
have
do.
so many, but
Just see if it works. I have a lot of pens that don't work. There
thank
go.
you.
You're welcome.
You want to share one?
No, that's fine. You're right. That's yours. Want to get territorial over the mic?
Just want to be heard.
Yeah.
On sports day this weekend.
Sports were exhausting.
Any wins?
Oh yeah, doubleheader, both wins. It was unbelievable. We played the Rough Riders and we played Cold Creek, Louisville team. It was both good, close baseball games. We came out ahead.
No else?
Yes. So Pat, Allison?
So, her folks were evacuated from Florida.
Oh, I hope that
And,
everything's okay.
we're gonna probably continue for a while just to cross where all of us continue to do all the committees so we can all get up to speed. But she'll do next month and I'll do pro stack. So we'll kind of put that. Yeah, she's gonna be hanging out at home, I think, the rest of this week.
Understandable. All right. Well, might as well call the meeting to order, and hopefully Joel and Tracy make it in a little bit. So, calling this meeting of the Open Space Advisory Committee for the Town of Superior to order on September 13th, 2017. So we'll just do some quick introductions for the camera. I'm Ken Lish, OSAC Chair.
Tricia Dunham, Vice Chair.
Sean Samuelson, member.
Ryan Welch, member.
Sarah Librant.
I'm Matt Magley, Town Manager.
Mark Leases, Board Liaison.
Patrick Cameron, town staff.
All right. And we don't have any public tonight, so no public comment. So might as well jump right in. Matt?
Thanks, Ken. Ken asked me to come to tonight's meeting to give you, the committee, an update on Parks 1 and 2 in the downtown Superior development. Some of the discussions the board has been having with regard to that development. As you're all aware, Parks 1 and 2 is the major parks in downtown Superior on the north and south side of the creek. Patrick's staff has done a great job with the Cold Creek improvements that hopefully will get permits and be able to start construction on those next year. And as part of that, these parks have been a top priority of the board that's been identified. The parks construction is a developer responsibility, public improvement, to be funded by the bonds that are issued by the districts and paid through property taxes and through the Urban Renewal Authority that covers that entire development. The developer and the districts have issued the first round of bonds that were about $22 million. And that's going to pay for what you see going over there now, which is all the underground utilities, the roads, any storm sewer improvements that are needed, street lighting, landscaping, that type of stuff. And the lead for the master developer has let us know and the board that the current bonds don't have the capacity to build these parks. And it won't be until the next bond issuance that they believe they'll have the money to fund the construction of these two parks. When asked the representative of the master developer when he thought that might be, he couldn't give us a solid answer. He was hoping within the next 2 to 5 years. And the board's discussion as part of their top priorities for this year, one of the priorities that was identified was finding a way to construct these parks as soon as possible. So we've been working with the developer. Patrick has a final development plan that he's been working on. The board has seen. They're going to see again on Monday, the 25th. And as part of those review, we'll have a discussion about an agreement with the master developer and the districts to fund these improvements to Parks 1 and 2 in advance of the next bond funding being available, which at that time, when it is available, would be refunded to the town. So we would be advancing these funds to construct these two parks. We've provided the board with two options to fund these parks, interfund loans, basically. We have our water capital fund, which is has about a $10 million fund balance. That was largely set up to pay for a Windy Gap firming project that we're participating in, and it's a firming project that helps firm up our water supply out of the Windy Gap project. It's a new reservoir that they're building, and there's about 8 or 10 cities that are participating. It's a hundreds millions of dollars project, and ours portion's about 20. So over the last 10 years, we've been saving money knowing that we would need to pay our portion of that project at some point. We are doing a group financing for that project, so instead of having to pay a cash payment of $20 million, we can make annual payments over the next 30 years. So that fund balance that we have of $10 million will stay in place for the next 30 years. So it gives us options to fund other things and then repay it as necessary. The other option we gave the board, or will be giving the board, is to pay for the construction of these parks out of the open space fund. There's about a $6 million fund balance currently at the end of 2017 in the open space fund. We did an interfund loan to do Wildflower Park, and that was a 3-year repayment with interest. The last repayment of payment for that interfund loan will happen next year. So in the 3-year period, we repaid the open space fund for the construction of that park. So that worked out well. Those are the two options currently financing of the parks. We still have to come to an agreement, reimbursement agreement with the master developer, whichever way we decide to pay for the construction of these parks. And we're working through that, and the board will review that on the 25th as well. So that's currently where we're at. Mark, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great synopsis of kind of where we're at. I mean, the important thing to realize is that this is just the board deciding to go ahead and construct these parks on our timetable rather than the developer's amorphous timetable of some time in the future, and that by doing so, we would still be repaid by the developer. So the developer would be paying for the construction, just we would be advancing the funds to get the construction sooner rather than some indefinite time period in the future.
And one of the other thoughts behind doing the parks, trying to do the parks next year, is it'd be better in our mind, staff's mind, to do the Coal Creek improvements at the same time as the parks. If you go in and do the Coal Creek improvements next year, and then the parks come a couple of years later, you take a chance of, getting into the creek. I mean, we'd stay out of it, but it's better to do them at the same time in our minds. That's another consideration. The master developer has said that the next bond issuance will happen when they they were trying to get Main Street started through a taking on their own projects, developing some of the buildings on Main Street themselves, and getting the financing for that. They're still working on that, and they feel if they pull that together, that they would be needing to issue bonds, the next set of bonds. But we still don't have a concrete timing of when that might happen. And what's going to trigger the next issuance of bonds is when they need to have different developable pad sites ready and the infrastructure that would be needed for that. It's depending on deals they can pull together for the commercial and the residential. So I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any additional information you may have.
Sure. So my first, I mean, so I love the idea. I think getting these parks built is awesome. I mean, it's something that we reviewed for quite a while. Getting the Coal Creek corridor improvements finished at the same time the parks are finished makes a lot of sense. The few things that jumped out at me, though, is even though we did the Wildflower Park loan, this loan is inherently very different because we were basically loaning money to ourselves for Wildflower Park, whereas here we're loaning it to an outside entity, which in my mind has a very different risk profile.
Can I clarify just something?
Yeah.
There, we are the districts would require that the town provide the $5 million. That's the kind of figure we're looking at now up front. We told them that's not something we would like to do. So right now it looks like the town would be in charge of constructing the parks, not the developer. But so it's kind of a gray area, I guess. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, the idea is that we'd be repaid by the developer. So
That's
even though
correct.
we're the ones doing the construction,
Right.
the idea is that the open space fund, if that choice is what was used,
Right.
would be at risk if the developer, heaven forbid, anything went wrong. I mean, if the developer folds or anything along those lines, then there's a lot more at risk than, say, when the Wildflower loan took place, because it's not like the town was about to fold.
But I mean, to that point, I mean, if the developer folds, then the parks aren't getting built anyway, because right now it's a developer's obligation to build. And under the cost sharing agreement, the developer has a $10 million contribution to the town, which can be used for civic space and parks and various different things under that agreement. And that kind of remains to be seen how that money is going to be spent. But that's part of the entire approval of getting the town center built out. But all of that is contingent upon there actually being somebody building something in the town center, and then advancing those funds. So, from my perspective, in the event that the developer declares bankruptcy and goes belly up, town still has the ability to build those parks, and any future developer that would come, in my opinion, I don't think that if this development failed, it would just sit idle for eternity. At some point, somebody would come in, buy it, and start the process of building it out again, right? When the market turns or something like that. And at that point in time, we would certainly be within our rights to say, well, we want this park built, and these are the conditions that we want, and this was the deal that was struck with the original developer. So, in terms of the risk, I look at it as it's not just like you're lending money to some third party that has the ability to just declare bankruptcy and you're never going to get your money back.
So, I was going to ask, so it's $5 million that you're talking about for the parks, or is
Yeah.
it the entire fund? Because when I saw plans for the parks, they were up to about 10 million themselves to be built. So I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah, so our cost estimates for these two parks, just the parks, is 4.3 million. And then the bridge abutments that are needed for Marshall Road are about 600,000. And then the bridge itself, the bridge deck, we estimate is going to be about 1.7 million. Now,
So you're talking about taking the entire fund?
No, no. We're
Well-
just talking about the park and the bridge abutments. That was, now the board has asked about how much it would cost for the bridge deck, but, 1.7. But that, the board hasn't discussed that, so they just asked for the cost estimate.
Are you able to put up what the plan looks like, just so we can recall
Parks
that?
1 and 2?
Mhm.
Yeah. Patrick can pull it up.
Yeah, some folks
Yeah.
haven't been on the board or
Oh,
on
I'm
the
sorry.
committee long enough to
I'm sorry.
even know what that
Yes.
means.
Yeah.
And what's the payback time that you're looking, I mean, are we contingent on waiting for the, I mean, to Ken's point, like, we knew it was the town committed to a 3-year payback
Right. correct.
on it,
Yep.
and this seems more like it's
It's
dependent on
ambiguous. It's
the
ambiguous.
So-
time. And I'm just, the reason why I'm asking is if the money all goes out, that basically means there's no acquiring, if level 3 comes up, there's no, I mean, there won't be enough money in the fund to acquire
Well,
anything during that
yeah,
time.
let me share some information with regard to that for you. So we have, in our 5-year budget, we have repayment in 2020. Now, there's no guarantee of that, but that's where we have it. At the ending fund balance, let's see, the ending fund balance in 2018 would be 1.7 million. That's in 2018, sorry. In 2019, it'd be 2.3 million. And then by the time we get to 2022, let's say we don't have any repayment by 2022, it's still out there. This fund balance would be 3.5 million in the open space fund. The sales tax generates about 530 to 600,000 a year in sales tax revenue for the fund. We also have options to do, let's say there's a piece of property that comes up that we want to purchase and we don't have enough money in the open space fund. We have the ability to issue bonds still under the tax measure that was approved by the voters. So we can issue another $6 million in bonds. And then we also can do interfund loans if the board, the open space committee and the board say, yeah, let's buy this piece of property. Let's find a way to do it. We have options as well to be able to do that.
Hypothetically, we could borrow from the Windy Gap Fund.
Yeah, we could borrow from the water fund. Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. Patrick, you want to
Yep.
just... Here.
That's
fire.
So, real quick for, yeah, or you can drive an all point. So just as a quick kind of reference point, we're along, there you go, blocking anybody's view. So this is just kind of a reference, this is McCaslin, this is Marshall, you picture the new Starbucks kind of sitting in this area here. This is Coal Creek, so 36 is up here. So the plan going back almost all the way now to 2013 was to have some kind of large athletic playing surface on what we call Park 2, and then more passive use with parking on Park 1, kind of restroom facility, amphitheater, stage, kids play area, kind of more of a nature play, which this group was instrumental in. And then kind of almost do a creek restoration. We started referring to it as a urban wild corridor, where on these kind of outer edges, the plan was to actually rebuild up the vegetation, clean it up, get rid of all the crack willow that's in there, get rid of all the cottonwood and all the debris that was left from the flood, and then almost really kind of stabilize and channel this. We took a lot of motivation from up in Breckenridge. So if you think of kind of the blue up there, or maybe even up in Steamboat, where you have the really hardened edge, you've got seating boulders. So we knew we were going to have this really formal, kind of heavy crossing here. So some nature areas, a little bit more of a formalized hardened edge nature area, and then getting kind of back to nature. This is all what we would consider open space over on this side. This corner over here was actually not originally in the project. We kind of fought, and I think this committee fought hard to make sure that that was included. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of it without spending too much time, but we can do kind of a quick fly through. So as part of the Coal Creek Master Drainage Plan, we'll add back in some drop structures. So we'll actually have 3 drop structures in this plan. Those areas are intended to also be almost the outdoor education areas where people can get down and get in the water, but also it provides us the level of drop that's required from McCaslin to 36. We spent a lot of time on the development side making sure that we kind of had the aesthetics of constantly like tumbling water was a big priority for the board.
Patrick, talk about how the floods of 2013 really fragmented the stream. So
Yeah.
this will pull it back
Yeah.
into one main
Yeah,
stream.
to Manager Magley's point, we've got what's called a braided creek right now. We actually have pockets that are as deep as 13 feet out there, and then we have areas that will dry up on any given day. So the plan, let me see if I can get a... So if you imagine now how it sits, the creek is kind of channelized through here, but actually as you get down here, as it stands now, it kind of just bubbles. So we have braids constantly shooting off to this side. We have a big kind of mound of stone and dead tree right in the middle. So the plan is to actually take all these braids and all the flow that we've got and just suck those right back into one channel and then really harden it up. So if we do ever get another flood event in the future, we're in a little bit better of a position. And we'll see that here. Let's kind of take a quick kind of peek. So really quick, something again that this group I think was instrumental in is these are kind of rain gardens here. So the other unique thing about the park is we have to accept a portion of the drainage that comes off the bridge. We have to accept a portion of the drainage that's currently over here by Starbucks, and then we're going to produce our own drainage. And these will actually be rain gardens, so the water, we can get into the park and shift it down to the creek. This is the amphitheater area here, and you can start to see kind of the hardened up edge that we're talking about on the creek. So again, you can kind of see this whole, where we were going from really dense native material, get all the invasive species out. Once we're under the bridge, it's pretty hardened up. There's going to be concrete, there's going to be seething boulders, but we really wanted to kind of tie the area together and make it not feel like you were just walking under a bridge. So Matrix Design Group came up with this concept of using the bottom part of the bridge as actually this, element that tied the two parks together. As Manager Magley mentioned, and we mentioned to the board previously, these are those bridge abutments that you guys have probably started to hear us talk about a little bit. And the unique thing about these bridge abutments is so much of the park, in terms of a play feature or in terms of the amphitheater, rely on those abutments being in place. So for those of you that were at the last meeting or watched the last meeting, you heard us talk a lot about, could these parks be built without them? You could. You'd have some throwaway costs. Regardless of what ends up happening here, for us to get our permit through Army Corps of Engineer, we have to replicate this neck down no matter what, whether that's actually with bridge abutments or whether that's with big piles of riprap or big piles of dirt. And that's one of the decisions that the board is going through. But you can see how many amenities that all the committees fought for can actually literally hang off the sides of these bridges. This is the whole nature play area. The kids amphitheater, a water feature that would kind of do a trickle-down effect that would kind of integrate into this, tree house. And we envision having kind of the trees that are laid over and some nature areas where kids can kind of get in and muck around in a safe environment. And then we kind of back out. So this would be the playable, it'd be a large playable surface. We wanted the field to be as large as possible, knowing that we could fit the largest sport all the way down to, 5 or 6 youth soccer games. But again, something kind of going back to OSAC, and I think a lot of you were on the committee at that time. We don't do a great job depicting it here, but this was the environmentally sensitive area. If you guys kind of remember that colored map, we had blue, pink, green, and the hash marks. This was that area of high environmental sensitivity. So we had the challenge of how do you put a playable surface next to what is also your environmentally sensitive area. And this committee, working with Matrix, came up with this idea of really shoring this up, lots of trees, various layers of vegetation, and then adding a walking path all the way around.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So with the narrowing of the creek, what's happening with the Prebles meadow jumping mouse habitat?
The Prebles was actually never found in this area. The closest Preble has been found several miles to the west.
We saw it that day.
You saw field
Yeah.
mice.
No,
but-
it was the long-legged Preble
Yeah,
mouse that we saw.
We've got several assurances from the Fish and Wildlife who have done all the biological assessments that there's not been a Preble, and that the only area that would be suitable for it in terms of habitat was some plant material that was found in this corner.
Right.
So, and that's an ongoing, there are traps constantly along the Coal Creek corridor. If you guys remember even the extension of the trail behind Coal Creek Crossing, we had to do a Prebles environmental test there, and they said that there was no impact. As far as staff knows, the closest one that we found was all the way, or that the county found was back by Highway 93, which then makes this a sensitive area because we have the same plant material that is found over there. This is a concession stand here, and you saw some bleacher seating for the playable surface. So that
And you're considering that part of the park? The bleachers, the
Yep.
concession stand?
Yep.
Okay, just wanted to
Yeah,
be sure of that.
And there, yeah.
we can. So that in a real nutshell, without going into all the nuts and bolts, which I'm happy to do.
No, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, and I can't remember. I think I might have sent this link to you, but if not, I can actually send it's in the cloud.
Oh, I don't think I've seen the link itself. But I think the only other thing that might be worth mentioning, just for everyone's knowledge, and Matt, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the retention pond in the upper left, that's an area that is being considered at this point as being changed from a detention pond into potential commercial development.
Yeah, that's correct. All of the Superior Marketplace stormwater is captured in the various ponds that are within the marketplace. So that stormwater is treated and released to the creek. The only water that this pond captures is water from Original Town, and the stormwater that comes off of Coal Creek and various parts of Original Town. And we had a firm study it to see if it was needed, and they determined that it's not. It can be treated. The stormwater can be treated other ways, and I've proposed to the board that this is a excellent site to, being right on the corner of Marshall and McCaslin, to develop into a development pad site. So we're continuing to look at it, and the board has had an initial review of it just from a conceptual idea, and so I'm thinking that it's going to move forward.
Okay.
So Matt, just to clarify, do you guys want the whole payment up front, or are you looking to stagger the payment over years too? Like the payout from the fund, are you looking for it?
The parks, it's going to be a 1.5 year project at least. So, I mean, the payments would be made over that period of time.
And then, just because I want to ask it, so I know that 10 million was, guaranteed from the developer, or however that works. Is there a contingency if the board decides in 2 years that, you know what, we want that 10 million from the developer to build a new town hall over in the park? Like, what's the contingency to this payment on this fund if the board decides, hey, we'd rather use the 10 million for a different type of project?
So currently, there's 4 parks that are required to be built as part of the approved plan development. That's these 2, Village Green, which is a less than an acre park, and I forget what their Central Park, I think is what they're calling it, near the cemetery.
Yep, in the back, yep. So Park 3, I think we all
Yeah,
knew
Park
that
3,
as
exactly.
Park 3.
Yeah. And those are all identified on the plan development, so they are required to be built as part of the plan that was approved by the board. So the board would have to amend the plan and take those parks out. So there has to be enough, and the 10 million is, we're going through discussions about what's included in 10 million. But the parks would have to come out of that 10 million.
So my thoughts are, I have a couple of thoughts. I think that the location of these parks, so say we build them with our funds or part of our funds and then something happens with the developer. I think that the current residents in Old Town and Rock Creek, I think
Mhm.
everyone would benefit from these park areas, even if like that development doesn't happen. But I'm wondering if instead of open space fund funding all of that 5 million, if maybe we did a portion of it and then the other portion came from that water fund that he was recommending, or that you were talking about,
Mhm.
just so that way we still have more in our own coffers.
That's a good
Yeah,
idea.
that's a good idea.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Patricia was saying. You know, the $10 million that's in that cost sharing agreement between the developer and the town, that is just a dollar amount. It is not like a limit on the town's ability to do a rec center or civic space, you know, a town hall,
You're right.
parks, you know,
That's correct.
it is an amount that the developer has agreed to repay to the town for these certain purposes. But if the town decides that it wants additional things over and above the $10 million, we can certainly do
No,
whatever
I
we
realize
want,
that.
right?
I'm
Yeah.
thinking the town might decide that they would prefer that 10 million be something else and
Right, and
not pay back from that bond to this fund. I could see a contingency for that after it's laid out. I'm just trying to figure out the timing of it, because I feel that if it's the bond paying back, it would be paid back probably within 3 to 5 years, because they're going to have to do a release within 3 to 5 years. There's no way
Right.
looking at it. But if it's the town decides at that time of that release that they would prefer not to pay back this fund and they would want to stretch it 30 years, that's a difference on how to pay back this fund. I'm not saying that the board would do that, but I'm just saying that I would assume that could be a contingency that the board would be
Right.
thinking about at that time.
I think the way that the board looks at it, and you know, from Trustee Sorelli when he was talking about it back when he was on the board, and I'll try not to put words in his mouth, but you know, my understanding is that the board was always contemplating that there were going to be certain things that the board wanted, that the town wanted, and it was going to cost likely
X amount,
above
yeah.
$10 million. So from the town's perspective, the sooner we get paid back the $10 million, you know, the better, because obviously inflation's going to make a dollar tomorrow worth less than a dollar today. So as these projects get built out, the sooner we get paid back, the sooner the developer accesses, you know, the additional bonding from additional commercial development or residential development, the sooner we get paid back and the better. So, you know, I don't think it necessarily, there would be any really incentive for the town to say, we don't want to attribute, you know, this particular project to the 10 million.
Right.
As far as I think the town is concerned, probably any and everything that would be subject to that, you know, definitional section that says what
Right.
constitutes, you know, civic space under that agreement, would be subject to repayment, and the town would look for repayment as soon as possible.
Yeah, and Trustee Laces is correct. I misspoke about the 10 minutes. The better way to look at it is because there's 145 million cap for public improvements for this development. And all the public improvements that are built within this development fall under that. Whether it's streets, roads, parks, lighting, indoor civic space, it all comes out of that money. So, you know, you could spend less in one area on parking structures and have more available for parks or indoor civic space or something like that. And the other thing, the agreement that we're working on with the master developer, one of the provisions in there that we're working to get included is that reimbursement would occur, we would be the first to be reimbursed out of the next bond issuance. To give us some
And that's with
certainty.
interest?
Huh?
And that's with interest?
Just out of curiosity, why the open space fund and the water fund? Why not, I mean, let's say the general fund, or, I mean, why were these two funds the ones selected?
These two funds have they have the largest fund balance out of the budget. The general fund has a sizable fund balance. The board has been reluctant, and so is my finance staff, to touch that because in case of emergency, those would go toward general operations of the town, parks, public works, snow removal, that kind of stuff, police. Whereas these, with the water fund, now that we're able to finance that and make annual payments, it's available. And the open space fund, we're working to buy open space. We've identified properties, but we haven't had a willing seller that we can come to an agreement yet. But and then we have the additional possibility of issuing bonds within that fund as well.
So what are you looking for from us? Are you looking for our acceptance as to being available?
And just to be clear, I requested that Manager Magley come and speak with us tonight just so we could get a better idea. So I don't know if he's looking for anything specific from us. This was more of a courtesy coming and speaking with us and talking about it.
Not to do on, I mean, it is a little tangential, but what is the status of the Saharias property? Is that still under contract?
It is still under contract. That developer is working to schedule community meetings with surrounding neighborhoods to go over the plans. We still do not have a formal application that's been submitted to the town. So I think their plan was to have these community meetings, get feedback from residents, and determine whether they wanted to move forward at that point. So that they're trying to arrange these community meetings now.
So a quick clarification on the bonds that we can issue. Let's say this loan goes out, open space fund goes way lower, and all of a sudden we have a project that we'd like to move forward on. One, for instance, that this committee has been very interested in is a Shan trailhead, potentially in the future.
Yeah.
Let's say that is 2-3 years out from happening if stars align. Is that, again, a scenario where even if the open space fund is no longer going to be able to cover that full amount, if it does happen to be expensive? I mean, I have no idea how much that costs, but
we've estimated, well, we have in the budget, the 5-year capital, $100,000 for that trailhead. Now, that could assume a partnership with Boulder County, and they're providing funds as well. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be a joint partnership because they have a conservation easement over that property. So anything we do there, we have to work with the county on.
Wouldn't the concept plan that we saw cost way in excess of $100,000?
I don't think it would.
Oh,
I don't think it would, especially if we were looking at that southern location, if you remember kind of on
Yeah.
the hill site there.
That 100,000 includes a bathroom, right? I always want to make sure that people want bathrooms at trailheads.
Yeah, that's true, they do, yeah.
But to Manager Magnus' point, that amount does assume some kind of partnership with Boulder County,
with
like we
Boulder.
did at the Colton Trailhead.
Right.
If that's all us, you know, and we're going, that would probably need to be bumped up, you're right.
And I think, I am comfortable in saying if we did the project on our own and it cost us 300,000 or 350, we would be able to fund it out of this fund.
And then the bonds themselves, do they, to be able to tap that source, does it need to go back to the voters, or we already have the ability to issue those bonds and it just is a board decision?
Yes, that's correct. We already have the authority
Okay.
to issue those bonds. We had, the authority, I think was up to 12 million, and our first issuance was around 6 million.
Okay.
Well, so I guess my thought is that if we do this and then level 3 came available with 6 million and pulling, I mean, what do you think we'd be able to still pull that off from the various pieces? I mean, what did we think that would cost? I mean, that's
20 at least. No
so
more
we
than
may
20.
not be able to get there anyway. I mean, or we'd have to be creative some other way.
Yeah. I mean, there's a threshold for that property that I think I'm comfortable in saying the majority of the board is not comfortable going above
Okay.
that property. And I think the level 3 property, which is now CenturyLink, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
CenturyLink.
But,
It's CenturyLink.
It's gonna be hard to make that change when we
Right.
say
Yeah.
that.
It's a CenturyLink property.
Right, yeah. That we might get some interest from the county for that.
Oh,
because
true,
of the ridgeline.
true.
Even though it's Jefferson County, I think Boulder County may have some interest in it. They've done that before, bought property in another county, so.
It doesn't say, that satisfies my
Yeah.
question. Thanks.
I'm still having a hard time with the idea if something goes wrong and the payback to the
Yeah,
open
yeah.
space fund.
Yeah.
So we talked about it a little bit, and Trustee Laces talked about how something does go wrong. We're still building these parks, and I get that the parks would be there, and it's still a benefit to the community.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, the open space fund is now out $5 million or so,
Right.
which then means there's $5 million less to purchase open space, which is what the taxpayers voted for this tax to do.
I think what I would propose in that scenario to the board is, you'd have to make the open space fund, or if you did, like your idea, split into two between the water fund and the open space fund, you'd have to make them whole at some point. If it gets beyond a certain year, 6, 7, and still nothing, then I think, depending on the financial situation of the town, it would be more of like a wildflower park situation where the general fund is reimbursing those two funds over multiple, 2 or 3 years, and then the general fund would be reimbursed, or the town, at whatever point that would be needed. That's what I would recommend to the board.
And I think that makes a lot of sense and was kind of the direction that I was hoping things would go. Is that something that could be built into, I mean, clearly this would be a loan to the developer, so this probably isn't language you would include into that contract for the
Correct.
loan, but I mean, is that something that can be formalized in internal documents so that there's always that very clear and binding end goal of making sure the open space fund is made whole?
Yeah, I'd have to talk to the town attorney, just to get her thoughts and ideas on it. And then the board would need to have discussion on it as well. Because this board may commit to that, but a future board could, determine that it's not.
And that's my biggest
Yeah.
concern if
Yeah.
it's not made in a binding document at
Right.
this point.
The other thing to think about is, this isn't a loan that the town is making to the developer. We're not writing a check to the developer and then saying, developer, please build these parks. We're building the parks.
Right.
We're paying for those costs. It's just that subject to the existing agreement and then the agreement to be agreed to, which would be the
Yeah.
reimbursement agreement.
Yeah.
The developer would then be agreeing to reimburse us for those costs. So, I mean, I could see how people still say, like, it's a loan, but it's, in my mind, it's different when you're taking the control out of somebody's, you know.
I mean, the project
hand.
will happen.
Right.
That's not the concern, that we put this money out and the contract doesn't happen. There will be
Right.
something the town gets as a benefit.
Yeah.
And I think that's great that we lose that risk, that we'll get absolutely nothing. We know that the parks will come about, but it's then that risk to the open space fund that it never gets paid back that concerns me. That's where I land on the issue.
So if there's nothing to decide on tonight, and how imminent is this decision to be made? And are we going to have input at some point in time on the process?
This is the input.
This is the input.
Well, yeah, and I would say you can provide input to the board on the 25th as well. So if the board approves the FDP on the 25th and an agreement to fund the parks, you still have an opportunity, because the board has to determine where those funds would come from as part of the budget process, which go into October. I think the approval is the first meeting in November is what's slated now, so you still have an opportunity for input on where those funds would come from.
That won't get determined at the next meeting when the FDP goes forward?
It's not in the agreement.
Oh, okay.
The agreement just talks about a dollar amount and how it gets reimbursed and the terms of that reimbursement. So
Gotcha.
the board will determine that when the budget's approved, and that's the date that would happen.
And just, the other thing to just kind of think about is at the 25th meeting, so we've got two agenda items. We've got the FDP to approve the actual development plan for the parks. And then separately, we've got the agreement for paying for the parks, right? So they could either both happen, they could both not happen, one could happen and the other couldn't happen. So, we don't know necessarily how things are going to shake out. This was originally before the board back in August of last year as a single FDP. And that's kind of the genesis for how this whole project is now being phased. Because at that point in time, the Cold Creek improvements were part of the park's FDP, and the board was reluctant to approve it because at that point in time, the developer was non-committal as to when this would ever get built. And their position was, well, like Manager Magley said, 2 to 5 years. And I think they said, actually, we think it's probably closer to 5 than 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at that point in time, the board was just not willing to approve an FDP that would just kind of languish out there and not get built. So they said, okay, well, let's pull out the Cold Creek improvements to get that process started, so then the Army Corps of Engineers could start the permitting process, because that was going to take 12 to 18 months to happen. And obviously, we didn't want to delay the process with that. So now this is the second part of that. So we obviously started that process, did a separate FDP for the Cold Creek improvements, and now this is the second part of it. And it's, is there a creative solution to get Parks 1 and 2 built on a timeline that we like, as opposed to the timeline that the developer likes?
So I think as far as our input to the board, all the discussion we've had is going to be reflected in the OSAC minutes, which we should be able to get into the board packet for that meeting.
Yeah,
If
I
we,
would think so.
yeah, so all of this input that we've had tonight will be in front of the board and will be available to them for their decision-making purposes.
So I have a question as a resident, and if I should wait till the 25th, that's fine, or if I can say now. So not speaking as an OSAC member, but speaking as a public person. I'm curious how 1 and 2 became the priority over, say, other items. And in particular, for me, is my sons came and spoke on the skate park. They are hoping that that gets moved ahead, and I'm just wondering how this falls against that.
So there were 4 priorities that the board identified. This was one of them. Traffic issues. There's various traffic issues that have come to the board's attention, addressing those. Indoor recreation space was the 3rd. And the 4th one was escaping my mind. Oh, the completion of Main Street and downtown Superior Development. So those were the top 4 priorities that kind of the majority agreed on for the year. And they'll reevaluate those every year as part of one of their retreats that they do. So, and we get various capital improvement requests from committees and residents, and even businesses that come through staff and go to the board and are considered. Every year, we have a 5-year CIP, which is a capital improvement program, and we always have more needs than funds, unfortunately. So we have to go through those and make a recommendation to the board, and sometimes the board has changes as they do their budget reviews. So.
But that's not to say that the board's not thinking about, other things. We were just, when we were talking in our retreat back in June, when was it? April?
Yeah.
Was it June? April 3rd. And we talked about kind of 4 or 5 things to be completed during this term, right? So it wasn't necessarily this year, but it was this term. And, the consensus was some decision on a rec center, whether we're going to go to the voters or not, building up Parks 1 and 2, building out the commercial core of downtown Superior. So it wasn't just necessarily Main Street, but just like getting the commercial core, because we were seeing all this development going on kind of on the outskirts, the perimeter of the development, but not necessarily the activity in the main commercial core. And then, transportation issues. So.
So again, just as a citizen, I'll say that at that skate park on that half pipe, there's about 30 kids on that a day. So I'm just saying, for some residents, a park 1 and 2 in an area that, yes, I think it will be a benefit to the town, but it's being put in an area where necessarily there aren't a lot of residents.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be some pushback on that from priorities from other people saying you're building something for
Right.
that everybody would have to trek over, because if it's a construction zone, you're not going to send people to go through trails to it, so it makes it harder, to say to your kids, like, oh yeah, go over there without supervision or something. So just like I said, speaking as a citizen who lives near the skate park and whose 2 kids use it every day.
Okay. So does anyone else have any comments about the Parks 1 and 2 funding?
Should we just do a roundtable of final comments? I think that might be easier to do.
We can do that.
Do you have any final comments?
I don't think we should give the full amount of loan from our open space fund.
Yeah, I think my priority is getting the parks built. I think it's an important piece of seeing more action over there. We're seeing all this construction and we're not seeing that much come out of it, but having these expedited, I think, are really good for the town. And it's not necessarily our charter as open space, but I think that trumps most of the other issues for me. Just wanting to see them built.
Yeah, I guess my only concerns are, the payback time frame, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, when that's going to come about and the risk that's involved with that. And then, I don't want our open space fund completely depleted. I think I share that sentiment with Sarah. It's not something I'd ever want to see happen. Maybe half, personally, like we did with Wildflower, but not the whole thing. We want to have reserves ready and available for true open space, other open space things. So those are my concerns. Final comments.
Yep. And I'll echo that. I'd be very concerned if we took the full amount out of the open space fund and left it so depleted. If funds do come out of it, I'm not necessarily comfortable with taking half out, but I think that's the closest I would get to being personally on board with it. I still stand by the idea that I'd like to have a formal mechanism in place to ensure that open space fund is made whole at some point, regardless of where it comes from, depending on the circumstances. So clearly, developer would be the person repaying that in horrible situations. I'd like to make sure there's a mechanism in place to ensure that it comes from other town funds, whether it's the general fund or somewhere else, if the developer can't repay it. But just to guarantee that open space funds are made whole again.
who is actually going to be developing the parks? Is it the developer
The
or?
construction?
Yeah,
The town.
the town
We
is
will-
actually doing
yes.
that, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think, we've always had a priority as an open space board that the Coal Creek corridor is an important amenity to the town. So I agree with Ryan that, building those parks around it and, protecting that and, making it a draw, I think is important. I also echo the same concerns about, all of it coming from the one fund. I think it leaves us, I realize there hasn't been, a lot of movement, but we know from Shan and things, some of these things come up extremely quickly. Like it seems nothing's happening and then something does. So I do echo that fear that we wouldn't have anything to do depending, if the fund was completely depleted. But I do see, from that perspective, doing the Coal Creek improvements and the parks at the same time, it seems a reasonable thing to do as opposed to piecemealing it out. I mean, I agreed last summer when we took it out because of the 18-month permitting and things like that, moving that project along. My hope at that time was that the developer would be up to speed by the time that came in, that it would be ready to go, but I can see the town wanting to build out those amenities. And the design is nice. I mean, I think they really did a good job with the design.
Okay. Manager Magley, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks
We
for your
really,
time.
really, really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming tonight.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so moving on to the next agenda item, wildlife enhancement and encouragement activities. So we touched on this topic at our last meeting, and where we left it was that we would try to come to this meeting with some ideas about possible enhancement and encouragement activities or opportunities, and try to start to build a more formal game plan going forward. One thing that came up and at least came to my attention between last month and this month, there was a meeting between the town board and the Boulder County Commissioners. And during that meeting, it's my understanding, and Trustee Lasis, please correct me if I'm misunderstanding it, was that Boulder County mentioned that they have lots of resources and expertise, one of which is a biologist who's working on the Hodgson-Harris Reservoir evaluation and doing work on that, which is one of our recommendations. But I guess where I'm thinking is, now that we know this, I'm curious if it might make sense to see if we can continue to tap Boulder County expertise, because none of us here are experts in this area, and help them guide us in what would be the best use of our time, best use of funds, if there are funds that need to be attached to this, and more or less trying to get some expert options. So I guess my question to Trustee Lasis and Patrick, you might know the answer to this as well, is my understanding correct, and is this something that is open to us to work with Boulder County on?
Yeah, I mean, they talked about that they have a staff wildlife biologist, on staff that they were willing to loan us for the purposes of examining, the reservoir and seeing, what sort of wildlife is there. I don't know the full scope of, the resources that the county has on staff, but we're not going to get what we don't ask for, and it seems like it's a great idea to just go ahead and see what other resources we're not tapping into, to see if there's something else out there that, we could avail ourselves of.
Yeah.
My thought when I was thinking about this, and I think I told you guys this last month when Sean and I were on the tour, the parks guy up in Longmont gave us wildflowers, if you remember, and they were doing, and I was thinking as I was thinking about this, in Boulder County resources would definitely be good, because I think this is always an area where you can invite pests of things that we don't want versus like enhancing what we do want. But something like that potentially at National Trails Day, that the giveaway would be something around either, wildflowers that would be out, that people could plant around or spread around when they're on walks or anything like that. So that might be,
I like that idea.
I think working with them and saying, this is what we're thinking about, like in our event in June, what would be something that we could do to encourage the right kind of wildlife enhancement or is it, instructions on how to build a bat box or something that like, whatever it is that might be of interest, but connecting with them now would be good for helping plan for a goal in June. That would be our sort of swag or whatever, whatever it is that we're doing in June, the next event.
I like that.
So that
I mean,
was-
sorry.
Well, I think that's a great idea to tap that resource or at least see what they have available to us. I mean, why not hear from people who are more expert than us?
Yeah,
Mhm.
my biggest concern was we put a lot of time and effort into this, spinning our wheels, and then it's not actually the right direction. And we've wasted a bunch of our resource, our effort, our time, maybe staff time, which I'd hate to do as well.
And I think we should also, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, utilize Ashley as well.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
with that sort of thought process between the two groups and say, this is what we're thinking, and we want to do it right so that we don't spin our wheels or don't
Yeah.
find a way that we've, quadrupled the coyote, population or something by giving out the wrong advice,
So I guess at this point, Patrick, is that something it seems would be that staff might be interested in taking care of, reaching out to Boulder County to see if we could potentially meet with them and.
Absolutely. And as a quick kind of follow-up item, we've been in contact with Tina Nielsen with Boulder County. She's a special project manager who has also put me in contact with Susan Spalding, who's a wildlife biologist, and Therese Glowicki, I believe, who's a resource manager with the Resource Management Division. They're willing to hop on board. They did ask if we could give them a little bit of leeway to get through their summer. But I think we've got some willing participants on their end. It makes a lot of sense. I know that we kind of get notices when they do projects in the open space. So if they're doing seed collecting or seed spreading or weed mitigation, we kind of get the courtesy heads up. Some of the ideas that we were just batting around as a staff were, the scouts came in and did the milkweed, which this group deemed appropriate. So I think there are some things like that. Ashley, I think we've had her around for so long that we kind of forget that she still comes in and knocks it out of the park. But I mean, she was out a bunch this summer when we had those coyote issues, and she's always full of ideas about, maybe you should actually change this habitat from a maintenance perspective, as opposed to letting this grow this tall in this area. Maybe, so we're constantly learning things, and I think we've probably unintentionally narrowed her scope to just coyotes, when in reality, she's done this forever. So whether she comes to a meeting or we have, Boulder County, or we try to get them all in the room together, I think it'd be awesome.
Yeah. So my thought is, rather than discussing this further tonight, we basically table the topic until we can discuss it with the experts, if that's okay with everybody else.
Yep.
That
Sounds good.
All right. In that case, moving on to the next agenda item, future Rogers Farm to Shan open space connection. Patrick, do you want me to give a summary, or would you like to give a quick summary of?
All right. I'm happy to give the summary.
Okay. I don't want to put words in your mouth, because everything I know came from you.
I should have kept Manager Magley around, because I didn't put words in his mouth either. So as you guys know, the developer met with the Arts Committee. I've been told that meeting probably shouldn't have happened. For those of you that remember Parks 1 and 2, who've been around long enough, ProStack had a meeting with the developer without involving anybody, and it got ugly pretty quick. So after chatting with Manager Magley,
it probably doesn't make sense to have the committees meet independently with the developer. But as Ken and I were talking, I don't think there's anything wrong with this group submitting questions that could be received in writing. And that way there's no, thoughts of impropriety or deals are being made or promises are being made and not kept, that it's all on the up and up and it's all in writing. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. And I apologize, when I heard that CAPS met with the developer, I assumed that maybe something had changed a little bit above me, that this was okay. And in fact, it was just maybe a miscommunication. That meeting shouldn't have happened. So, but as Ken and I were talking, I think it makes sense if there's a list of questions. Shan Shan's a high priority. Trail connectivity over there is a high priority. I don't know that we can move too much further without having this information. So if there's some questions you guys want to throw together, let's get those over there.
So basically, at this point, the purpose of tonight's agenda item is to develop any questions that we might want to send over in writing to the developer. My understanding is that we don't necessarily have a lot of questions. It's really a single question.
Yeah.
Can we get some type of vehicular access that goes through the Rogers Farm to a potential Shan Shan trailhead?
Well, and as soon as possible. I mean, honestly, the building's down. We have a draft plan. There's a lot still to do over a 2-year period. But, I mean, having the access road going in there sooner than later is really what we're asking for.
True. I think it's
Well-
hard to say as soon as possible, though, because they don't even have a formal application to the board yet. It's still only been at the concept plan. I mean,
Well, again, it's a road, right? They can develop around a frontage road. They're not going to be able to do much with that huge slope down to the frontage road going to Shan Shan. I mean, they're not going to be able to develop, or no one's going to would want to live in housing that close to the road anyway. The frontage road is basically going to be your buffer, your road buffer.
so we as a group have talked about that frontage road being a great solution. Depending on how that the developer brings forward his application, he might see a road going through the middle of it being the best, and having mixed-use office space, I think, was a potential solution at some point, or he had things down in that area. So even though that's what we see as the best option, he might come forth with a different solution that could still get the vehicle access to the trailhead. So
Where was it last left at, Mark? Was it, right now they went back to pretty much just being housing everywhere?
There were 2 concept plans that we saw. One of them was all residential, and one of them had a portion of, mixed-use commercial, as Ken said.
But I thought it got
I don't remember if at the last concept plan they had abandoned the commercial aspect and made it all residential. They may have.
That's
I think
what I
I think
heard.
the last concept plan had, instead of a mixed-use commercial, had more dense residential, kind of closer to McCaslin, and then single-family or kind of duplexes. As you went.
and then things were
Closer to
ultimately
original.
left very, my memory says they were left very much up in the air, that he basically said, I want very clear guidance, or we're going to do our build by right that we
Yeah.
currently have. And I don't remember if very clear guidance was ultimately given.
No, it wasn't. And, I mean, so they have, part of that property has already been platted, and they have zoning on it, so they could do use by right on a portion, but not on all of it. So it's not like a complete solution, so they couldn't just pull a building permit tomorrow and build out the entire project. They could do a portion of it, but I don't think they want to do that, so that's kind of where they're at right now. But I think that they're just prioritizing stuff across the street right now, and it's just not a top priority for them.
I
That's
think-
my understanding.
So I don't know that necessarily, like you said, we have a question for them, other than if they do build a frontage. I think what we're trying to convey to them is this committee, and I think the town, some of the board members at least, are open to that Shan Shan trailhead. So when they bring forth a plan, if there's a frontage road, that it would continue up or, work to get there. And I think one of the understandings that they should understand is just, we already have an issue with traffic in Original Town because we don't have the trailhead, and they could end up with the same, if we don't get it right, the way going in and all of that, and I know we've talked about further south and that, they might end up with the same problem of people pulling into their neighborhood and parking to get out to open space, right? Like that's part of, part of us wanting to build the trailhead there is once this is all built out and things, it would be good to have parking there that people aren't parking in the neighborhoods that, are coming from other areas and accessing all the open space and that. So I think, I don't know that it's a question other than if they do build a frontage, would they continue it, but just more that they understand that that's our plan for that land to the south.
Right. And just as an addendum to that, right now, based on the existing zoning, they could only access the property through Original Town. So even though they've got a partially completed
okay.
roundabout, they don't have the approval yet from the town because they haven't submitted an application that actually would develop that, which is that portion of the property that isn't platted. So I don't think they want a roundabout to nowhere, and I don't think that they're intending to just access it through Original Town. So, these are all kind of questions that, remain, to be seen as to like what the solution is going to be. But I think the intention is to have a roundabout access that development, either in addition to access from Original Town or in lieu of access from Original Town. And then how that then connects to the Shan Shan trailhead is also, a question. But I think that, it's certainly something that everybody's thinking about, and we need to address it at the right time so it's done, properly in terms of being planned. And but I hear you in terms of getting something built sooner rather than later.
I mean, back to Sean's point, we've seen concept plans, but do we all, maybe it's worth discussing, but in my mind, if there was road access there, that would be a preferred solution then to the other concept plans that we've already seen. Those other concept plans are pretty much irrelevant, or not irrelevant, but maybe not as high priority or best option as if we had a road in. Because neither of those had great access off of
I'm thinking
McCaslin.
from the top, because you still have to come out to the right and then try to bang a U, right? So like the frontage road is the best because then you're entering the rotary.
It's the safest.
Just in the flow of traffic, not trying to do something that potentially could cause problems, which is what we're thinking now, that someone comes out and tries to immediately go 3 lanes left to bang a U-turn, is the concern there. I mean, so that's why it is the best. You're right, it's the best option. It's probably the safest. It would function somewhat similar to what Colton does, is you come off the rotary, you go in, then you get on a rotary and go whichever direction works best for you, so.
So again, it's not a question, it's a request. It's a request, I don't want to say demand, but it's a strong request that it be very much included in the development plans to have a road that gains us access to that trailhead. That is my proposal. I know we've proposed it to the board previously, but I'm not sure it went anywhere from there. So I guess for the board to the developer to say to them, it needs to have some kind of access from the rotary. If there is going to be access from the rotary into that development, it needs to have access that continues on through to the Shan Shan trailhead.
Yeah.
I think that sums it up.
And there was, last time the developer came forward, I can't remember if it was last time or the time before that with the concept plans, I was present for public comment and reread what we had written and made that statement in front of the developer, and I believe there's at least 1 or 2 trustees that talked about it too. It might have been 2 times ago. I can't remember. It's been a while.
But squeaky wheel, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we have to craft some language then, if this were going for. And the idea isn't to send this to the board right now because there's nothing in front of the board to even communicate to the developer. So this is hopefully something that we send to the this is something we send to the developer to put on their radar.
I just say that, I mean, given the fact that the building was just demolished, it's timely to just remind the board that the building was demolished, and, you know, as we're thinking about trailhead access and, you know, whatever improvements are going to go in where that building, you know, used to exist, it certainly makes sense for us to start talking about how we're going to access it.
And I have a question for Patrick, just as I was thinking about it, because I heard a number of people say, hey, that building's down. Does anybody know is there anything stopping people from going on that property now? Like if I chose to, I know it's open space, drive down the driveway. And I just want to say, like, I just wanted to remind that because I don't know if there should be something stopping people from going on the property if it's not safe or
Yeah.
like, so I don't know if the town in itself wants to either one, say, hey, if you want to drive down the dirt road and park your car and jump on your bike and access out that way, you're more than welcome, or hey, we'd really like you not to enter that property at this time.
There's at both access points, the one off of the rail bed and McCaslin, there's a swing gate or a chain with the lock. So you could still potentially drive in the drive aisle by the old mailbox, which we've seen people do, and then we normally, you know, the sheriff will come and ask them to move. But there is the chain and the posts that block it off from McCaslin, and then I want to say we have a swing gate and a lock down off of the rail bed. So, Ken, real quick, back to your point, and if you guys are okay with this, I did try to capture 5 or 6 bullet points from what I thought I heard you guys say, and then maybe that can kind of help generate some thoughts around. So here's what I was trying to capture from the comments. First bullet point, will the town get some type of vehicular access through the property to a future Shan Shan trailhead? What is the timeline for the project? Will there be a frontage road along McCaslin that continues up the hill to the trailhead? The committee would like the developer to know that a trailhead at the Shan Shan location is a high priority, and traffic and parking are priorities that need to be addressed to limit further congestion in the area. The committee would like the developer to include an access road through the Rogers Farm property from the roundabout to the future Shan Shan trailhead and have this included in a future submittal. So those are just kind of some sound bites of what I was trying to capture.
I think I captured it fairly well. My biggest concern is I don't want this to come off, for lack of a better word, because my brain's not working very well, too rough with the developer. I want to make sure that it's well received just in the language. I mean, do we need an intro to this to try to help him? I mean, does it help to show the developer that this brings value to him as well and his development by having access to a trailhead, right? I guess there's already a trailhead right there.
You know, in kind of going back to at least staff's preliminary conversations, I think that they're definitely aware of that. But yeah, you know, maybe some kind of entry statement that now that, you know, kind of going to Trustee Lace's point, now that the building has been removed and the site is clear, the Open Space Committee is interested in moving forward as quickly as possible with the trailhead development, and that's kind of the intro sentence. That way it's not just, here's our demands,
Yeah.
you know, that we're wanting it to move forward. You know, and this is a good starting point. Because you know, not that ProStack has been the lead on this, but they're also very interested in making sure that the developer potentially funds, like you guys are, as much of a future trailhead or a future access point, get the cost on that, which I know has been talked about in the 5-year trails plan.
And I'm just thinking out loud here, which is always dangerous, but you know, one possibility that I guess comes to my mind, you know, I wouldn't be presumptuous and assume that anybody needs to do anything with their land at any point in time, right? You can do whatever you want with your land. But if we've got this, trailhead that's going to be coming, and we'd like to access it sooner rather than later, maybe there's like a temporary road that can go in, kind of like we had with the roundabout that was, constructed, so we had some access, so we can get improvements built to the trailhead, we can get a parking lot in, we can access it, via that temporary roadway, and then if they develop on that property and improve it more permanently, great. If not, we can continue to use the temporary access.
I think that's a great idea.
Could be just gravel road for that matter. I mean, you don't need a pavement. Just
Temporary is
dirt
temporary.
and
You know,
gravel.
when we needed that as a secondary access in 2013, that's exactly what we did. Just came in with road base and,
Well, and that will always
Millings.
remain there. So
That'll
whatever we
always-
do there has to always include the evac out of original town and Rogers.
Yeah,
potentially. I mean,
unless for
depending
some-
on how they build it.
unless for some reason they wanted to use that rail bed. But, I mean, I think at least the last that I was involved in, that preserving that rail bed is almost like a maintenance easement was the priority. And then you're right, coming up the hill to the secondary access is, as far as staff knows, that's still the plan.
That's always the-
So I guess just a question for the rest of this conversation. We've heard the summary of the points that Patrick had, which I think did a pretty good job. We want to add the idea of considering a temporary road in the meantime, to see if they're open to that. Are there any other ideas we want to be captured in this document we're going to send over? And then B, a question both Patrick and the committee. I know we're not allowed to wordsmith recommendations to the board via email after these meetings, but this isn't really a recommendation to the board. We've heard generally what's in there. If we can basically say tonight, yes, we're good with these topics, and we can just wordsmith it afterwards, is that acceptable?
Yeah, I think when we do our kind of quick turnaround review where I shoot the draft to you guys
Yep.
for final.
That's when we can do it.
If it's not tight, let's get it there, for sure.
So is the committee okay with that path forward?
Let's do it.
Yep, I'm good.
So, any other comments, questions, or points that we want to get in there that weren't made?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
So real quick on that temporary road access, the thought is to start to transition what's at the 3rd Avenue trailhead to a temporary
Yes.
site, correct?
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. I want to make sure that I'm articulating that the right way.
Yeah, I think that's the intention.
Okay.
So speaking of that, what's there now for a trailhead? Are we planning on keeping that open, or are we going to close that off? Are we going to leave the gates and everything, the signage and everything, or are we going to actually remove all the signs, move up to Shan Shan, remove all the gates in there, so there really isn't an access point there, and Shan Shan truly becomes the trailhead as it should be?
You know, at least the way that I've kind of viewed it on the surface is exactly that.
Yeah, good.
You know, we started this as very much a how do we relieve a problem that's being created on 3rd,
Mhm.
and then this opportunity to get the property.
Because we're not trying to
together.
create just another access point. We're trying
No,
to
yeah.
switch it completely.
Yeah, it's my
Close one
understanding
and truly
that,
open a real one.
you would bypass that. And
Right.
I don't know if we would change that configuration down at the corner where you can't even, you come out the one swing gate and you have to kind of go in the other one. You know, I've always assumed that we would somehow corner that in.
Yeah, right.
To where you just stay on the trail. Because I
Right.
think the
Yeah.
gripes that we hear over and over and over again is, one, the sound of the gate. When it slams in the morning, you can hear it all the way down the street.
Yeah.
We know that the fire department has expressed some concerns about having double parking on that road, not being able to do the radius turn.
Mhm.
And then, again, just having that street full and people parking in front of residents on the weekend. So, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to,
Cool.
to move it. I think maybe another step, and I could reach out to the guys at Boulder County, is, if we were to feed into that trail from Shan Shan, even on the temporary, we should probably get that ball rolling with the county sooner rather than
I
later.
agree.
Mhm.
And I don't, I'd have to pull it up, but maybe there's a way that we can angle that through our property and not, you know, jump right through it. We'd have to maybe look at that.
Yeah. But we know it takes a long time to get that Marshall Trail plan.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
plan
and
amended and.
yeah, and in all honesty, I think we talked about maybe 2 meetings back about, I think the time frame thing on this, I mean, that took us a greater part of a year to get that amendment plan changed. So, you know, the sooner the better in getting it on their committee's radar and then through their staff. I mean, we might as well get it going.
And how much input are we allowed to have on where the actual trail from the trailhead connects into the
Quite a bit.
existing? We are?
Quite a bit.
So we can go, okay.
Yeah, and actually,
I'm just looking at the territory that we own versus Boulder County, and if,
assessor's map really quickly.
you know,
We've looked at this a couple of different ways, but, you know, we kind of, with the Coal Creek connection to Mayhoffer, just pencil and said, that makes sense. You know, what's the least impactful? You know, you visit the site a lot when it's the first thing that comes up. And if I haven't given you guys the reminder, anytime you ever want to know who owns what currently
Oh, yeah.
between the town and the county, or even neighbors or neighboring jurisdictions in the county, we
Quite
live on
often.
this website all the time.
Yeah, I just learned about this one recently. It's awesome.
I'm
Yeah,
way,
it's
there
good
way
stuff.
too often. I feel like a creeper.
Yeah.
So we now own all of that, and we own that.
Yeah, so
We
you
don't,
could-
so, you know, I don't know that it makes a ton of sense to do some kind of, if you're parking over here temporarily. I mean, I guess you could, you know, if we got zero traction with the county or they want some process, you could right now run
Straight
people
shot.
here, here, and here.
Ugh.
We would probably need to do some kind of, you know, I know that the cattle run right here, even on our little
Oh, yeah.
jointly owned.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's, you know, agriculturally, we would need to look at something. You know, I mean, maybe we find kind of a grade in here. One of the reasons why we were even looking at this one up here is because it'd be hard for anybody to say, oh, you know, that's really impactful when you're like, well, our property's here and the trail's there.
Right.
So no, it's not. But I'm open to, you know, sketches on paper or ideas, or if we want to add this as an agenda item to, you know, formalize something.
Yeah, I think we should.
But I do see as a worst case scenario, if we're getting nowhere, it's a long drawn out process, you still could park people here and drop them down onto the rail bed. And we could potentially work with the county on like a fence configuration, which would make it not, well, I don't know, we'd have to look at that. You can maybe run people on the inside of the fence line.
But then you're still getting
Yeah,
back
you're
to the
still
original
getting
problem
people-
then,
yeah.
right? You're not, that's
You'd
not
almost
helping
have
at all.
to, we'd almost have to move the fence line.
You would, yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, then you're saying, well, maybe you just wait it out and
Right.
because you're getting throwaway costs. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely something to.
So we own that yellow section and
Yep.
yet we still co-own it, right?
Yeah, it was within.
So what is it, 60/40?
You know, I'd have to look. I'd have to look at what the actual.
And how
easement
much
was.
approval do we really need if we actually have, you know, majority ownership of it?
Probably not much, except for the agricultural piece of it,
Because they lease it out.
because they lease it out. You know, and that's, you know, I don't really foresee there being any.
I don't see the cows caring if we put a trail through there. So.
Well, I could see their agricultural staff.
Really?
Yeah, we ran into that over here. Big
What-
time.
What was the issue?
Just, I mean, they were talking about cows like to walk this way, and during calving season, you know,
They don't like people
They don't
around.
like people. I mean, it was, boy,
Makes
we
sense.
learned more about cattle behavior on that project than I ever thought I would.
Well, and I think on some of the things that they allow cattle on, they don't really want any humans on.
Right.
Because they're afraid someone's gonna get stepped on or harmed. in some
I
way.
could almost bet you though that the county themselves would not want a dual access point. They wouldn't
Oh.
want something here and something here. We would, if we move it over here,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, even on the trade, when we built this connection here, I can't remember if they made us remove one of the trails up here, which was fine. You know, we had the cut through trail back behind the homes. It was just really conceptual.
Mm.
You guys remember Matt?
Yeah,
Oh,
Matt
yeah.
Morris.
Matt
Yeah.
Morris, yep, was kind of the one advocating against that. So for us to get that in, we actually had to say we were fine with getting that one out. So I could see the same scenario happening with a Shan Shan trailhead. We say, hey, okay, we're gonna put it in, but we're gonna drop Third Avenue trailhead. And we may want to just kind of have those forward-thinking thoughts so we're prepared. Now, having gone through it, I feel I have a better understanding of what the county likes to see, I guess, or.
But part of putting the trailhead is because we have such traffic and congestion at the Third Avenue trailhead, right?
Right.
That's not appreciated
Yeah.
because it's all street parking. So that's part of so I don't know that we would necessarily, like, that's a good give from our perspective.
Totally.
And I think it's a good give from original town residents on that street want that gone. So, like, then it makes it easier to say that this is a residential parking area only. Right?
Would they consider altering the existing trail that's in that yellow rectangle? Such that it could come, instead of coming down and keep going west, it could curve back and then kind of cut back and then not go near the corner of Third?
Something like that.
And just kind of diagonal, more about, yeah, right.
Yeah,
pretty
like maybe
steep
start
in
to
there.
jog.
Yeah.
There is a plateau
It's-
in there.
There is a plateau.
Yeah, and
that-
actually, for those of you that kind of walked it with us after the flood, that's where a lot of that water hung out. There
Oh,
was
is that
a
it?
plateau. There's like two old, and I don't know if you can see it here. There was one of the old concrete. There it is. There's one of the old concrete buildings from back when it was the industrial mine.
Yeah. So these are great ideas. I want to make sure we don't lose them. What might make sense is anything we hear from the developer will frame how we have these conversations where we want to put things, whether access is right or not. So my thought is, let's get this out to the developer, get their response back, and then that will guide our path forward, and then we can have these more detailed
Mhm.
conversations.
So Patrick, when are you thinking we need to reach out to Boulder County to get on their radar?
I'll probably do that with this set of notes and just let our guys know, or our contacts that helped us on the other connection know.
And then the other, piece that we would have to incorporate at some point is public engagement on the trailhead. So that, we're thinking, or I guess I'm thinking, and probably Sean's thinking too, is like we're looking at something that we want it complete in 2 years, right? Like we're looking that it's up and functional and being used, so how we back from that to timing, we'll have to, work at, to get into the nitty-gritty of things.
And not to go further off the tangent, but maybe I can wait until later. Since we're talking about Shan Shan, how are we going to be discussing, we have kind of an overview, conceptual plan from a high level of the layout, the parking lots and stuff. Are we going to go into detail about the designs and the historical significance, and maybe meeting with the historical commission and getting their input on different things? And
Absolutely.
okay, I just want to
So
make
I
sure
guess,
not-
so that would be my other question then for you, Patrick, is when do we, like, we got sort of, removing the thing, and the board gave, a portion of money for that, 3,000-foot, design, kind of
Yeah.
what we have now. When do we have to say to the board, can we officially call this a project more than, can we say, like, we're now working on this and all, and all these things being like talking to Boulder County,
Right.
planning, public engagement, doing all of these pieces.
So why don't I do this? Because I don't remember in which year we have that 100,000 that Manager Magley mentioned.
Yeah.
Why don't I, and maybe I might even be able to find it on the network tonight. I think that identifying and tying it to a year that has funding is probably the best start.
Yeah.
And then maybe working backwards from that. And I don't know, I've gone through this a little bit with ProStack, but even like with the South Pool Skate Park right now, it was pushed way back into the budget. So, I do have just the thought of it could be like a 2019 or a 2021 project or a 2020 project right now that the committee would maybe want to articulate to the board through the budget process. This is actually a little bit of a higher priority. Could it be pushed up and then getting that on the board radar? So why don't I try to figure out where it's currently sitting in the 5-year budget plan as a starting point, and then if it's not a year that you guys are comfortable with, I would say that we need to start advocating for that to change. That's probably the first part.
And beyond that, I mean, that's the actual funding for it. That's basically the end of the process as far as that's actually getting it built.
Yes,
But
everything.
There's a lot of planning that.
Well, yes and no, because we'd probably need to start spending some money a year in advance to have a construction, a construction plan and have somebody come in and work on the design and get your guys'
Design,
feedback.
public
And
engagement.
yeah, because you wouldn't think it'd be more than a 6 month, but we'd need to give an architect, a landscape architect, and an engineer probably 6 months to come up with a construction design based off of your guys' feedback. This is outside of town center, so I don't think we'd have to come forward with like a formal FDP. I think that's been specific to projects within the town center. But, I'm thinking back to the wildflower process and even, maybe Founders Park is a little bit more closely related to this. We had several rounds of committee input on the design and then we actually got to a point where the designer came to the meeting.
Yep.
And then the designer took the feedback, came up with the design, then came back to a meeting. And I guess I kind of envisioned something similar. Then that following year, say we had X amount for the pre-process, and then it rolled right into the next year for a construction
Yeah,
process.
so that's what we're trying to figure
Yeah.
out, like when does this become like the official kickoff of-
Right.
And
of
beyond
engaging all the services.
and beyond whatever Patrick finds out, we've got our our joint meeting with the board roughly 5 months away. Between now and then, we will hopefully hear back from the developer and have an idea of whether we'll be able to have a cut through on Rogers Farm. So I think we'll have a lot of really good information then, and then can really use that meeting. I mean, we can communicate it through our work plan as well, which will happen before then. But that meeting would be a great opportunity to really get this on the board. And we can always make a recommendation to the board and get that going before then as well. So there's lots we can do. I don't think we're there yet. I think we need to find out if there's even any interest in humoring us from the Rogers Farm developer, because that will fully change whatever that trailhead looks like and any ideas.
And we do know, though, that Boulder County knows we
Mhm.
want a trailhead there.
Yeah.
And are not, at this point vocally opposed to it, right? like through everything, we get the regular, you have to follow the process, but they don't,
Yeah. It sounded like they even had some interest in it.
Well, that's what I mean, they have oh yeah, that might be,
Yeah.
they see the value of it from that perspective.
Yeah.
So.
Patrick, the only other question I have about this trailhead and input and everything else is, I know ProStack also has questions and everything else. In terms of roles and responsibilities and overlap and everything, are we owning this project? Are we co-owning this project? I just, what are we doing?
So, this is
I mean, we're
staff's
going
right.
about this like
Right.
we're owning it.
Yes, this would be this would be staff's recommendation, is if you're gonna own it, get very specific in your work plan that you want to own it. I think, based off of this last year, I'm fairly confident in saying that the board is probably going to look to start to minimize the duplication over the work plans across the board. And that's not just you guys in ProStack, but it's now Art Committee, and it's just, you know, we have 5 committees alone just in Parks and Rec. And I think that the ProStack understands that, you know, and respects that. You know, they looked at a trail alignment, not specifically a trailhead. I think that was kind of a creation from this group. But I really think that that's kind of the key. And you know, maybe there's some element of feedback that's collected from them, but, you know, personally from staff's perspective, I'd like to see where the committees start to take on those. All right, we're the cowboy, but you guys give feedback, or we're just owning it. Because even from staff's perspective, you know, what I don't want is you guys to go down one path and then ProStack go down another path.
Right.
And then we have the budget process, and Boulder County, they can go down a third path, and we don't get anywhere.
Okay.
So I would say work plan, and, you know, right, it's going to be budgeted out of open space, which I think the board has kind of acknowledged that you guys are the lead on that. But if I could throw in staff's hint now is, you know, I think the more specific on those work plans, the better. You know, you guys ultimately do what you guys want to do on those work plans. But if I could say where I think things got muddled is the open-endedness of, you know, the committees are starting to add several bullets of open-endedness. And it's getting very gray. And I think that, at least from an outside perspective, that's where we tend to start to clash. So own it, identify it, put some date parameters around it, and articulate it to the board when the board reviews it, I think is the way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Beyond that, last I heard, the board was going to revisit at the budget meetings whether or not they still were interested in combining OSAC and ProStack. I don't know if that's still true, but that's what was discussed at the retreat back when this was discussed.
Yeah, and I don't know that I've heard anything.
So back to what we were discussing at hand, just one clarification in the bullets that you have. Did we paint ourselves into a corner and only state that we're interested in a vehicular access as a frontage road along McCaslin, or do we keep it open-ended enough that if the developer creates some type of plan that a road going like through the property, through the development is still?
You know, the first bullet I have is, will the town get some type of vehicular access through the property to a future Shan trail?
Okay, so it's open-ended. Okay, I think that works. And we've communicated in the past that we think a frontage road makes the most sense to prompt him, but.
So we did, because when you look at that and you see what that roundabout is like, a frontage road is going to take so much room to come off of that roundabout and loop back around, as opposed to just coming and taking a left turn and coming straight into a trailhead. I mean, I just don't see how a frontage road is even feasible there.
And so the frontage road idea initially came from one of the versions of the concept plan that they put forward, and that was when they still had, was it office? Non-residential along McCaslin. They had a road that initially went there.
Okay, so they did actually show it and how
it wasn't exactly a frontage road
built in there.
No, but it was.
Yeah, but it was a road that paralleled McCaslin right there.
Right, you can, yeah.
I think we're generally kind of, and there's the second interior roundabout, so you're kind of talking there.
Yeah, and then there were the Mouses. So that was basically what was being developed as non-residential, and on the left side of that strip was where they had put.
Oh, okay, so on the left,
access.
so not parallel to McCaslin.
Exactly,
Okay.
it's kind of parallel, but not quite.
But not, okay, thank you. I don't want to,
Yeah,
that's enough of a
Yeah, no,
sidetrack,
it's such a
thanks.
drop off, there's no way you'd have to.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that.
So it's really maybe 50 feet or 100 feet either way.
Something
So
like
it's through
that.
them, yeah, okay, thanks.
So I don't have anything else to add to our bullets. Okay. In that case, I think we might be good. Were you trying to show us anything in particular?
No, I was just seeing what those, who own those frontage properties there.
Ah, gotcha.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But it's a little bit of a hodgepodge.
Gotcha.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, in that case, we'll wordsmith when we finalize the minutes, but I think we've got that. So, moving on to updates and look-aheads. One just quick note that didn't make it onto the agenda because I didn't hear until a day ago. We did lose a member. Andy has resigned, unfortunately. Not because of a lack of interest in the committee, but other duties. I believe he's the treasurer for Calmonte and a bunch of other responsibilities as well. So this became a time commitment issue, but he noted that he truly appreciated all the work and dedication and value that everybody puts forth here. So he'll be greatly missed, but that now leaves 2 openings for OSAC. The presentation to the board on 8/14, I think everybody had a chance to watch that, so I'm not really going to harp on it, but just the ultimate takeaway that I got is what we've said on Saharius has been heard by the board. We don't need to say it anymore for the time being. If a application comes forward, based on my understanding from the assistant town manager, is that there might be an opportunity for us to provide feedback on that, but that's a bridge we'll cross when we get there. So we're good on Saharius for the time being. We basically already touched on the second one, the Boulder County projects, ferret reintroduction and Hodgson Harris environmental assessment. Boulder County is doing the HHR assessment for us, which was great. We didn't have to use our town funds to take care of that. And they're going to get back to us on the ferret reintroduction once they're done with their summer stuff. Patrick, is there anything else to add to those two?
No, nope.
Okay. Chili Fest. Trish, you want to give your thoughts on how things went for the first part?
Yeah, so the first part went good. Tracy and I did get some feedback, Patrick, that people thought that perhaps we should, since we were handing out doggy bags, that the doggy bag should be orange. And the reason being is that would be more visually present to people, that they're dropping like an orange bag on the grass as opposed to the green. We got a lot of feedback that people said, yeah, they're using, I see bags, but nobody's throwing them in the trash. So, so we did get that, and we said that we would bring that back. Obviously the swag we have has green, and I don't know that we would do that swag again, but I think they were also talking about the bags that town puts out. So something for you guys to think about, if a more vibrant color. I guess it goes both ways right now. Do we want to see 3,000 orange bags on the side, or does that help people pick it up more or not?
I think it would. I mean, my opinion is it would. I would pick more of them up if they were more obvious.
Yeah, so that's one of the feedback that we've got. And then just general people, happy with the efforts that OSAC does. Mostly that's what I got. It's hard to compete with the beer fest part and the chili fest. If you don't have food or drink, it's. We had a lot of people come through, but I think people were in a pleasant mood and just moving along. And
at least my experience when I did the second half of Chili Fest was that if we didn't have the swag, I wasn't going to have basically anybody come and talk to me. And we shared a booth with ProStack, and we actually ended up folding up. I think it was 30 minutes, 40 minutes early, basically because we ran out of the swag, they ran out of their glasses. We ran out of our dog
Oh,
bags.
I still have a box. I took it because we
Oh.
didn't want you to be,
Oh, yeah.
because we had so much left when I left that we were like,
We ran out
We didn't
about-
want to leave you all this stuff to carry, so I have one box left at my house.
Well, so once we ran out, about 45 minutes into the time I was there, I couldn't get anybody to come talk to us. So we ended up folding up early. But when we were able to get people to come talk to us, there weren't a lot of specific comments. Walking them through what our open space priorities were, everyone was generally incredibly supportive. I think the most passionate that I heard was both for level for CenturyLink property and for the Zaharias property. Everyone else was kind of blasé for the rest, but those two are clearly at the top of everyone's interest. And then same with the trails plan. Everyone was generally in supportive of the trails we selected, but nobody said anything specific. So that was what I got out of the second.
Yeah, I mean, I think always with, I think our map showing how much CenturyLink owns is always an eye-opener for people,
Mhm.
that they realize that, oh, that's not town-owned property. And the other thing that we had was people commenting on the Rocky Mountain Greenway, and not wanting those trails to come through. So, I mean, I know that, Sandy handles that from a trustee perspective, and Joel handles it from our committee, but that, was just one or two comments.
Yeah. But generally successful.
Yeah. No, it was successful, but like I said, it's hard to compete with the food and drink.
Yeah. And Patrick, I have the 3 poster boards, the 2 maps plus the dog waste. I can hand those off to you tonight if that works. Or okay. Next, the pros tour. And Patrick, I know you guys have been focused on a lot of other stuff. Is there any movement?
Yeah,
on-
actually, we've talked about this, and we were thinking, either mid to end of October before we shut off irrigation, because I think that's just a critical part of the tour, and to be able to take you guys up to the raw water bladder and kind of see how things gravity feed and know where all the cool underground pumps and caverns and vaults is what kind of makes the tour cool.
Sounds great.
So that's kind of what I'm working on with my guys. I don't have a specific date. I know when we
And
chatted, we talked about like maybe a Saturday or a Sunday. That way people.
Who's it open to?
My thought is it's going to probably be all committee members who are interested. Just that way, it's across the board. So, yeah. Did you say sport? That's the other thing, is trying to juggle youth sports, or maybe it's a Friday after work, but I think our goal is to try to provide something that's like schedule conducive for everybody, without, me having my staff stick around and come in and work on a day that they're off.
Yep.
So that's what we're looking at.
Awesome. Standing updates. Recommend Greenway. Jules not here tonight. I know there's another stewardship collaborative meeting. I don't think anything on the Greenway was discussed, though. We'll get updates from him next month. Open space acquisition plan. I know Ryan's been waiting on me to give him comments. I'm almost there. I think the plan is, Patrick, now that you guys are past Chili Fest, maybe we can sit down with you guys and go over just ideas. I know Ryan and I were talking about whether or not all of the information we had initially requested is still necessary. So just sitting down in a meeting and going through all of it to get all of us on the same page might be useful.
I mean, it might be worth discussing it real quick, though. I mean, originally we discussed that we wanted to put a history of the funds and the history of the purchase price. Thinking about it again, maybe that document is better for us to have as a separate document, but maybe that shouldn't be in this document. Because I don't know. I mean, it'll go stale pretty quickly, right? If this document's out there for, 7-8 years before it gets done again. But I think us having a record of it is good. So wanted to maybe make that recommendation and see what if people agree or not. But that'll simplify, too, what we need from staff. Then we really only need a few little pieces of some property status, and I think it'll be really minimal.
So Allison and I were chatting, do we want to try to do that before this meeting next month, or do you want to try to do something separate? So I'll just throw that out as an initial starting point, and we can maybe dialogue offline, but you let us know what schedule-wise works.
I mean, I work across the street, so I can get over here whenever.
Oh, perfect.
So my schedule's easy.
Okay.
So
I was envisioning something before the next, so my hope was that we could meet before the next meeting, and then that we could actually have the plan as written as an agenda item at our next meeting. We can present to the group, just show quickly what we've got, kind of walk everybody through it, and then that might, depending on how far we get, that might be a time where we can even distribute it to the group and start to get more formal comments. That way we can continue to move this process along. So, yeah, if we
Cool.
could meet with staff
Mhm.
in between now and next meeting, that would be awesome. Okay,
I like it.
cool. Tract H?
All right. We're close. I know it doesn't look close, but it's a little bit like Wildflower in that all the heavy lifting takes place underground, and then, with like 2 weeks left, it'll pop up and look a little bit like an open space. So the 8-inch reuse line that runs from McCaslin almost all the way over to 36, or the Anderson property, is underground. It's being backfilled. All the 4-inch irrigation lines are in place. We've had a crew out from Keene pouring the trail. I don't know if you
Mhm.
guys have been able to see that, but they're actually pouring about 180 yards worth of trail a day.
I couldn't tell when I drove by to see
Boy,
if it was actually
I
being
mean,
done
Oh,
or
I,
not.
I
They're-
noticed tonight driving down, you
Yeah.
can start to see it from
That's
McCaslin.
cool, and they're
Yeah.
they're on it.
Awesome.
A couple of just the snags that we're running into with all the new development going on in Colorado, like you can't get plant material. So we're tapping into about 4 nurseries, including out-of-state nurseries, just because of the growth right now. And everybody's hitting a planting season, so if you started a new housing project and you're somehow on the hook through your plan to have material in before you shut off irrigation, it's like you can't get plants. So our guys have been working with the contractor to tag and identify as many plants as possible.
Wow.
Kind of random, but so there's actually 3 ditches that run through this project, and people called for their water downstream, so we've actually had 3 running ditches for the last month through our project.
Really?
So as you can imagine, trying to run irrigation lines and get culverts in and pour a trail while you have ditches running through your project's been a bit of a hassle, but the guys have done an amazing job. So we're hoping that we'll have irrigation on by next week and plant material in the following.
That's great.
And then the trails, the trail may lag a little bit. They're going real hot and heavy right now because the weather's great. So we're close. We're getting really close.
Awesome.
Patrick, Tract A,
Track day, correct.
is that something else that will be funded out of open space, or is that not known at this point?
It's not right now. Let me so I don't know that we need to completely kill the lights. Can you guys see this generally? All right, so Tract H is in here, right? Tract H. And actually, these are now, we would probably consider this the Anderson property, but actually, Tract H comes down quite a bit. So after the project started, we gained what is called Tract A, which is this. So the plan will ultimately be to bring the trail through Tract A and connect it over to here, but our main focus is getting through H before we get to A. So it'll be interesting because the trails is going to be a trail to nowhere, which I think we've kind of let everybody know. It'll come to right here and stop, and then we'll come up with a plan that will need some budget and board approval to get it there. So.
I assume from day one there'll be some social thing that happens.
Well,
yeah.
There's not real
Let's-
good access through
let's
there
see
for
if you can
social. There's some
see.
pretty good fences through there,
Oh, is
and
there?
yeah,
Our plan.
Especially once you get down towards Anderson.
yeah, even yeah. I mean, up
This map doesn't do a great job, but you can kind of see an old access road. So we were thinking that if that happens, that this will if there's maybe a way we can scoot something over even temporarily and do crusher fine, because the social trail is
that'd be
going to
cool.
develop anyway. And
All
now,
right,
there's barbed wire.
You'll start it.
There's barbed wire here that can come down, and I mean, I think we could figure it out. Our youth corps kids took down all the Russian olive, which was awesome.
Oh, wow.
And then just kind of real quick, so you have a head gate here. So just picture a ginormous pipe right here. That's the ditch underground, just a massive pipe. And this road actually belongs to the ditch company. So that's why we consider it trespassing, because it's the ditch company. So there's a huge head gate here. There's a head gate here. There's a head gate here. And there's one down here. And we were fairly confident they weren't going to call for water. And sure enough, all three of them called for water. So it was a bit of a...
And the trail's on the northern end of the boundary. It's like right on the boundary, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be
We
a
pushed
good
it as far north
stretch.
as
Yeah.
possible. Even here, this is all kind of graded back out. It kind of rides this ridge right
Mhm.
here. So you'll have culvert crossing. There's one more down here somewhere.
And then it stops at the Anderson property.
And then it'll
on the
stop
other
generally
side.
right here.
Mhm.
Yep.
Have they come forward with anything recently?
But that'll connect nicely into the 36 bikeway, potentially, because there's anyway, that'll.
That's actually
that'll
where
allow-
we're starting to kind of think about, in addition to whatever gets developed, or if anything gets developed here, maybe just kind of another straight shot over to the 36 trail,
Mhm.
because I think people are going to almost expect it.
Mhm.
Is just off the top of your head, if you know, is the Anderson property application still in, or has it been?
No.
Seems like it's been there forever, but nothing's come forward.
At least what I've seen in terms of the Parks and Rec side, I don't know that I've ever seen a resubmittal. I think it's gone pretty quiet. But I don't know if Stephen or Martin on the admin side have heard anything. I can't remember if I was explaining to you guys, we tend to be on the tail end of the review process because the irrigation and plants tend to be the last thing that go in. So sometimes I'm not always 100% up to speed, but I don't think anything's been in.
Okay. Well, unless anybody else has anything for the good of the order, I think we're done. All right, meeting adjourned. Oh, everybody, we have some extra stuff in my car, just a handout. So if you guys just want to swing by, get some random things.
Boxes in your car?
Yeah. I only have the posters.
Oh, yeah.
I have the box, I was housing it. I can bring it by or house it. I don't know.
How's the way?
Hi, Mark. Thanks.
When our next, I'm sorry, I took it now, but we had a full 2 boxes, so we were like, oh.
So if you
You
want
know,
to get
and
more
it-
people there, we set up a booth in the beer fest. We get Superior to donate a keg.
Yeah, oh yeah, well, see, there it works. You want to brew some beer in your bathtub, anybody?
I brew at home, so I'd be happy to. I don't want public consumption of my stuff, though. The liability there might be too much.
Well, again, a great time.
Definitely noticed, we had some intoxicated people, so we're actually gonna have to.
Think about that.
One guy rode his bike there, he said he ended up leaving it at some stranger's house.
What?
He had to walk him.
We
That
actually.
might have been my house.
Yeah, I don't know.
We're starting to go through the growing pains of having like a 10,000 person event, but we started to start putting in pot, and smoke, which I think is gonna happen anytime I get that's one Colorado. And then we had people, for the first time, we were like, I'm not actually sure you should go to your car.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to create some kind of mechanism or have the police.
Well, especially because you're driving in there, so now you're like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah, so
You
they're
need
getting
to go-
on that
You need to
shuttle
stop by Sergeant
And we-
Chamberlain on the way to
We
your
needed,
car.
this is the first time like we were like, oh, so there's a road there. And then
Oh, yeah, that's not good.
so we're needing to probably
Yeah,
strike a balance.
not a Wayne's field.
There was one guy who came out of that area. Were you there?
No, no way.
What a nasty broker. were so fired up because we had a little bit of vendor. So they were starting to back up and wanting to load in, and then those exact same vendors were ready to go home at the end of the night. We were like, sorry.
I got an ambulance here.
Oh, man.
That's hilarious. Thank you. I
This is
just
good.
got
Thanks
one
for
thing,
everything.
so-
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Patrick, is there future plans to have like a flashing walkway that connects across McCaslin? Because there's only 2 access points across McCaslin over to Rogers Farm, right? You got, there's like the bridge underneath, I guess, or the rotary, and then the other one is up by the lake. Because
You should join planning commission. I think maybe I should tell you that, but I don't know.
No.
You know, I don't think I've actually seen anything.
I was just.
I'm
I
trying
mean, it's,
to-
not- it's obviously no hurry right now. We got a lot of things in the.
Well,
hopper.
here's,
But at some point, that's gonna come up, it's like, someone's gonna say, oh, boy, wouldn't it be nice to have some access, somewhere between way at the top of the hill and way at the bottom
well,
of the hill.
and maybe,
Get across.
you know, maybe at the point we get to design, we start to bring in a guy like, you know, Alex, and this kind of goes way back, I don't know if you were even on the committee, is, you know, at one point, the board said anything that happened along the chasm actually needed to be a transportation, not an open space or park side, so the funding would come out of more
Oh,
transportation related. Because you were, you know, at one point, we were thinking like these multimodal opportunities should those be in the town's overall transportation plan? Maybe, you know? And I think when the board was very interested in anything along the chasm had to be covered. No more crusher line trails, you know, and it was all pet access and bike access. Well, are those really, should Parks and Rec really be bearing that burden, or should that be transportation funded?
Well,
You know-
transportation's gonna do it, why don't we put a tunnel underneath?
Yeah,
Just use
you
the
know,
railroad bed.
So there were
Straight
things,
through.
so there were some things that, you know, the previous board really kind of wanted to get into philosophically that I don't know ever got hashed out. I think, gosh, I remember seeing the transportation plan, they actually had like 5 roundabouts on the chasm. Like every entry point into Rock Creek.
Oh my
So you
God.
had one in Christensen, roundabout, Colton, roundabout, Calmonte, roundabout, and Indiana. And it was a solution, it was a potential solution to, man, I would love to see that study. It's gotta be somewhere in this creek. But it was this whole plan of how do we make McCaslin not feel like a country highway? And we actually had like a study of, you know, everywhere else in Colorado, when you're driving, you have open space all on your side, like the brain inherently tells you to go faster. So we were like, man, should we like,
Psychological stuff.
should we put a whole screen of landscaping on that side so it feels narrowed in, you know, and people aren't going so fast? Or do we do roundabouts, or do we do like neck downs where people have to slow down and more crossing points? But then, you know, you've probably been around long enough to start to see is things will go really hot and heavy, and then all of a sudden it's like, somebody hits the brakes and the priorities change.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, okay, I guess we're going to
Well,
work.
to be honest, if Rogers, the same developer that's doing Town Center is doing Rogers, if they were smart, they would have put a tunnel underneath the castle and